Welcome back to yet another episode of Cricket Mehfil, and today we'll be previewing the upcoming ODI series to be played between Pakistan and the West Indies in Multan. And today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very special one because I have with me over here co-host and co-founder of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. He's also contributed to Wisden Cricket and the Cricketer magazine, amongst other notable outlets. And if I'm not wrong, he was perhaps the only West Indian journalist covering the recently concluded West Indies versus Netherlands ODI series in Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, I have here with me Machel St. Patrick Hewitt. How are you doing, Machel?
I'm doing very well. Excited to be on Grassroots Cricket. Thank you for having me on. You are correct. I was the only West Indian not the only West Indian, sorry, the only West Indian media person in the Netherlands covering that series. So that was quite unique. I know Pakistan are due out there very soon as well, but it was a really cool experience. So I'm sure Pakistan will have a similar one to the West Indies.
Absolutely, and it's a privilege to have you on our show. Thank you so much for taking out the time. Before I even get into the preview, Mash, I just want to talk about your journey a bit from where you started with the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Of course, it's gained a lot of movement now. You have north of 2K subscribers on YouTube. How has that been, and how has that experience led you to actually covering the West Indies live?
Yeah, where to start? I mean, everybody created basically a podcast or a medium outlet during COVID, and we were no different. We started ours just before COVID hit. Obviously, we didn't know what was going to happen, and myself and the co-host Santoki, we essentially realized that there was a gap in the market for a West Indian media platform that covered the cricket. Primarily, though, I would say for the diaspora. So the West Indians that live in the United States, the West Indians that live in the UK. Those are kind of like our two big hubs. But ultimately, West Indians all around the world. And then secondly, the cricket fans around the world who essentially see West Indies as their second team. And we kind of figured that there was no real media outlet that kind of brought the news of the West Indies team to the rest of the world. People picked up bits and pieces, but because they only picked up bits and pieces, what tended to happen with all discussions around West Indies was it centered around when the West Indies were good. And I'm not saying we're bad now, but obviously we're not the great side we used to be. And we just felt that, listen, this is a new era of the West Indies cricket team. And for example, a lot of Pakistani fans are going to see this West Indies ODI side turn up in a couple of days, and they're going to be like, who's that? And who's that? And what's his story, etc., etc. Because we're in a new era. We can't keep talking about what we once did in the 70s, 80s, and early to mid 90s. And ultimately, if I had to sum it up, the podcast was about bringing back the present day West Indies cricket team, men, women, boys, girls, etc., to this current generation and trying to rally for everyone all around the world.
That's amazing to hear, and I can tell you one thing. There are lots of Pakistan cricket fans whose second team is the West Indies, so I'm sure they'll love to hear all of this. And you spoke about a new era that's dawning upon West Indies cricket. I want to kind of touch on Kieron Pollard's retirement on that same note. Of course, a behemoth for West Indies in the white ball format, and his impact on white ball cricket for the West Indies, it's been immense. And I just see now that Nicholas Pooran is emerging as this young, instinctive leader. And I personally, in contemporary cricket, he's one of my favorite West Indian cricketers. It's really exciting to watch him take on that mantle of limited overs captain. And also, I must say, Mash, his commitment to the international cause, I think that's very admirable because we've seen in the last decade or so, a lot of top West Indian cricketers have more so been focused towards franchise cricket. But Nicholas Pooran seems like he's committed 110% to West Indian cricket.
Yeah, you've raised a lot of good points there. So let's start with Pollard. Pollard's retirement was a surprise. And I don't think we should try and pretend it wasn't. Not you, I'm talking to those who might be listening to this. It was a huge surprise. Everyone had assumed that at the minimum, Pollard would take us through to the T20 World Cup at the end of this year. And if he had retired at the end of the T20 World Cup, I think I would have understood a bit more, because then he could have said, you know what? Nicholas is ready now. He can take the team forward to the ODI World Cup next year if we're in the qualifiers, whatever it might be. My time is done. Pollard has possibly retired 6 months too early, maybe even a year too early, because his initial remit when he got the job was to see the side through to the end of the 2023 ODI World Cup, if we even get there. What I suspect has happened is two things. And I hasten to add that as things currently stand, I don't know the full answers. I'm hoping to get Kyron on our podcast soon to be able to speak for himself. But I think it's one of two things. One, I think Kyron's body is now telling him, you know what, you can't do this anymore. Kyron's played a lot of games for West Indies. I think sometimes people think that because he's had this kind of mercenary tag over his head for his whole career, particularly from West Indian fans, people forget that he's actually played over 200 games in limited overs cricket for West Indies. That's a lot. I think it's actually over 250. And that's a lot of commitment for somebody who wasn't even picked all that often. When he took over the West Indies captaincy, this was someone who didn't even need to captain the West Indies because he had his franchise cricket. He didn't need to come away from franchise cricket to suddenly now captain the West Indies team. And I think he did it for the greater good. He was given the remit of nurture our next captain. That next captain, as you correctly pointed out, is now Nicholas Pooran. And Shai Hope was nurtured as well to one day be a captain as well by serving under Pollard as a vice captain. I think Pollard's body has told him, listen, you've probably got enough to now do a bit more franchise cricket before you finally retire from cricket altogether. And also, I think he'd had some bad form in the IPL. I like him, but he would admit that he's not widely loved throughout the Caribbean. Kieron Pollard is loved more outside the Caribbean than inside the Caribbean, which is ridiculous. He's not wildly loved. There are elements of the West Indian fan base and media who almost relished seeing West Indies lose under Kieron Pollard. So I think all of that put together ultimately led to Pollard saying, you know what? A, I don't need this anymore. B, Nicholas is ready. And C, my body is telling me, you know what? For my last few years in cricket, let me just finish now with some franchise cricket when I want to, as opposed to when I have to. So that's Pollard. With Pooran now, as I said, Pooran's had a year and a bit under Pollard's captaincy as vice captain to get ready for this. So no one can say Nicholas isn't ready. He's been groomed well by Kieron to take over. He's had stints already as interim captain when Kieron was injured, most notably against Australia last summer when we won 4-1. I think in T20s. He was captain when we went to Pakistan just before that series ended for, I think, all the COVID complications. So he was captain then as well in an interim capacity as well. So Nicholas is ready. And I think what you've said is key, and I want to really echo that point. Pooran didn't need to take this captaincy because Nicholas is in demand all around the world for franchise cricket. By taking the ODI captaincy and T20 captaincy, by default now, Nicholas is saying to franchise tournaments, well, I'm actually not always available. I can't always play in PSL. I can't always play in, let me just pick some random leagues, BBL. I can't play in T20 Blast in England because my ODI commitment as captain of the West Indies will always come first. And you're right. That's a huge commitment at a young age, at 26, to say West Indies come first. And he has to be in the era that he has grown up in, where West Indians are almost seen as players who take franchise cricket before they take West Indies selection. He's to be commended for that. And I think he should be respected for that he's clearly committed to the West Indian cause. This era of players he's now captain of, I think it's very much Pollard going is probably a good thing only in the sense of, and I don't mean good because I wanted Pollard to stay, but it's a good thing only in the sense of this is now a changing of the guard, really and truly. When you look at the West Indies ODI squad that we're taking to Pakistan, there's no household names in there. And when I say household names, let me be clear. Yes, people know who Shai Hope is, and yes, Shai Hope is one of the best ODI players in the world. But when I say household, I mean global superstar household. We're moving on now into this next generation and next era of West Indies cricket. And Pooran encapsulates that. This is his generation now. So it's probably right that we move now from Pollard leaving is now the end of, I guess, what you'd call Pollard's generation of West Indian cricketers. And we move into the Nicholas Pooran generation of West Indian cricketers. So it's a new era. It really is a new era.
Absolutely, and we love to see it. It's very refreshing to see a young cricketer who is almost at the peak of his powers commit to his national side in this era where there's so much proliferation of franchise T20 cricket, and the international game has suffered a bit, especially you can definitely relate being a West Indian supporter. And of course, we wish Nicholas Pooran the best of luck for his reign as West Indies white ball captain, and also Kieron Pollard, the best of luck for international retirement. Moving on, Mash, I want to shift the focus on the opposition, a very young, energetic, dynamic Pakistan ODI side. And contrary to past Pakistan teams in the limited overs format, this one has a very formidable top order. You've got the likes of Fakhr Zaman, Imamul Haq, and Babar Azam as your top three, and they've done really, really well over the last 3 years. Fakhr, who plays at a higher strike rate, almost averages close to 50 in ODI cricket. Imam, of course, there have been questions raised around his strike rate, but he's put those to bed in his last series versus Australia and also averages north of 50. And then you've got Babar Azam, the captain, and he's really grown into the role. Averages north of 56, I believe, in ODI cricket, is the number one limited overs batter in the world, both ODI and T20 cricket. So you've got that top three, and you've got a young and blistering pace attack led by, of course, Shaheen Shah Afridi. He's doing the rounds in world cricket. Then you've got speed demon Haris Rauf, the experienced Hassan Ali. You've got young and exciting prospects in Mohammad Wasim Jr. and Shah Nawaz Dhani. So they're very well set as far as paces are concerned. And then you've got all-rounders Shadab Khan and Mohammad Nawaz returning to the side, which definitely bolsters Pakistan's chances in this series. And they've just come off a success versus Australia, which was Pakistan's first series victory in an ODI bilateral series versus Australia since 2002. And, the ODI Super League hangs in the balance. I want to know, what's your take on this Pakistan side, Babar as a leader, and how do you see them competing in world cricket in the near future?
You've done a really good sell there of Pakistan's strengths. Listen, Pakistan to me they're in a really healthy position as a not just ODI. We could say ODIs. We could have the same conversation for T20s. To be honest, they're in a really healthy position vis-a-vis white ball cricket. And as you've correctly pointed out, when you talk through their current ODI setup, I think the only thing I look at, because the strengths are obvious to me, to the point where I don't need to echo them. You've effectively said what the strengths are. I think for a Pakistani supporter, and I guess this is me looking at it from an outside in, what Pakistani supporters should want to see from teams like the West Indies and anybody really who Pakistan are playing is these type of series, which are worth points, which is more important than the actual series aspect of it. You want to see what I call the difficult questions answered. So we know what Babar can do. We know what Shaheen Shah Afridi can do. We know what Haris Rauf can do. We know what Rizwan can do. We know all these things. So really and truly, it's hard because those players are so good that you're not often going to be put in a position where you need to have the difficult parts answered. So it's a weird situation for teams as strong as Pakistan because you want them answered so that when it comes to the crunch games, now when we get to like World Cups and suddenly there's crunch games, you're not sitting there thinking, but was our number 6 and number 7 or our number 5 and number 6 really tested prior to this World Cup? Because at some point in time for Pakistan, the top order won't fire. And then you're looking at, okay, well, what do we really know about what our 5, 6, 7, etc. can do in pressurized situations? So I'm not saying that Pakistan should want to be in that position, but they also need those questions answered. But that aside, the team is very strong as an all-round unit. Put it this way, if West Indies could just play well in one game, just one, I'll generally speaking be happy because I do think there is on paper, obviously cricket's not played on paper, but if we're looking at it on paper, there is a clear gap between the strength of the Pakistan side. Never mind the fact it's going to be in home conditions. There's a clear gap between the Pakistan side and the West Indies side. But the only cautionary note I would say is I would have said there was a clear gap between the West Indies test side and the Pakistan test side when we played in the test series last year, and that ended 1-1. So that's what I'm saying. Cricket isn't played on paper. We can look at the two sides and see the clear differences. Shaheen Shah Afridi, to me, and I'll openly say it, he is the best bowler in the world. I don't care what anybody else wants to say. He is the best bowler in the world. And it worries me that we have to face him. I was hoping that Pakistan were going to rest some players. I thought they might just rest a few players at least for this ODI series. But actually, the one thing you didn't mention and why this series is actually important for Pakistan. As much as they've had the victories over Australia, if you look at the table, it is actually much tighter than people realize. I mean, West Indies, we got our 3 wins versus Netherlands, and that put us up to 3rd in the table. That's a bit of a misnomer, because I think when things balance out, we're not going to be 3rd in the table. But currently, Pakistan are 10th. So actually, it makes sense why they've picked their strongest team, because actually, this isn't a series. This is about getting those 10 points game after game after game.
Absolutely. Like prior to this Australia series win, Pakistan was doing quite mediocre in the ODI Super League. So this series actually matters a lot to them. And I think you pointed out a real flaw as well in Pakistan's ODI setup. 5, 6, and 7, those numbers are really up for grabs because after Rizwan at 4, you have a bit of a hole over there and no one has really been able to plug it for quite some time. So do you think that is the recipe for success versus Pakistan? Get their top 3 or top 4 out like West Indies would be aiming to do so, and then kind of get into those 5, 6, and 7, bowl them out early, and then win a game.
Yeah, and I think I have to hark back to the T20 series. Again, T20s and ODIs are different games altogether. But Pakistan won them relatively comfortably. But there were a few, I think in 1 or 2 of the games, West Indies were actually competitive. But the thing is, if you let Baba get away, you know he's going to make it count. You just know he's going to. So for West Indies, the game plan has to be clear. I mean, if it was, I don't know if what's better. I don't know if it's better for us to try and bat first. I don't know if it's better for us to chase. But whatever one we try and do, whatever the situation is with the wicket in Multan, ideally you've got to get through the top 4 for Pakistan and then put the rest under pressure. Now, we could bowl Pakistan out for, let's say, 250 or less than 250, which is ideal for the West Indies. But such is the formidable pace attack of Pakistan, I reckon they could defend 250. So that's what I'm saying to you. I don't even know if it's better for us to chase or if it's better for us to bat first or whatever it might be. But it's key that if we are going to be competitive, we have to somehow get through the top 4. And that's the only way to put Pakistan under pressure.
Duly noted. And now let's talk about this West Indies squad. Of course, there's a lot of young, talented, and exciting core of players over there who are all new to the international arena, albeit inexperienced. But then you've got Shamar Brooks, who's done so well in the top order, just scored 100 against the Netherlands as well, and was West Indies' top scorer in the series. You've got Shai Hope, averages north of 50 in ODI cricket, also got 100 versus the Netherlands, and has that experience. And then you've got someone exciting, such as Kyle Mayers coming in, who also got 100 against the Netherlands at a strike rate north of 100. So you have these exciting players. Throw in Rovman Powell, who I think has really come into his own now as a lower order hitter, and power hitting is something he knows really, really well. And then you've got Akil Hussain, who was the man of the series versus the Netherlands. And I really like Akil. I even liked him in the T20 World Cup. I thought he was West Indies' best player. And I would actually rate him higher than Fabian Allen, who isn't in the squad. And another West Indian player who's very young, very talented, I can't wait to see him in the ODI arena versus Pakistan, is Jayden Seales. Now, this guy, the way he bowled versus Pakistan in Jamaica last year in the Test series, honestly, I was awestruck. And I really feel like he could be a handful in international cricket going forward. And I think West Indies should keep him in mind across all formats. So, what would you say about this West Indian unit? Yes, they're inexperienced, but there's a lot of talent going in there.
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely talent there. I think we are weakened by the absence of Evan Lewis and Shimron Hetmeyer. I think that would weaken any side if you take 2 players out like those 2. But we can't do anything about that. We've got to work with what we've got to work with. Obviously, Jason is being rested at the moment as well. We have players in that side who have the potential to be match winners. The key word there is potential. It's one thing, and you've given some of the kind of key stats from the Netherlands series. And yes, I mean, I was there. It was great to see Kyle Mayers hit his century and Brooks hit a century, and Hope just did what he does.
Another player I want to mention, is Brandon King. I thought he was really good in the lower order, which we haven't seen much of him in the lower order. He's generally a top order player.
Right. So they finally moved Brandon King in. That's where he should be, if I'm honest. This experimentation with Brandon King at the top of the innings, if they're going to do that, fine, do it in T20, although I wouldn't do it there either. Brandon King, through his professional career until he got to the West Indies, has always been a middle order batter. So it's good that they finally put him in that position and he's made it count versus the Netherlands. But with respect to the Netherlands, we are a level above them in the same way that Pakistan are a level above us. And what I saw versus the Netherlands is what I'm going to say is going to be key with us versus Pakistan. In all 3 games versus the Netherlands, they had an opportunity in each game where if they had made it count, they probably might have won the match. And what you tend to find with sides where there's a gap in quality is the weaker side has to take that key moment. It could be a run out. It could be not kicking on from a good start. So I don't know, 100 for none. You don't kick on from a good start. It could be getting the top order 30 for 3 and then you don't kick on after that. Where the weaker sides don't take that moment to be ruthless, the stronger side will always win the game. So when I look at the West Indies side, we are talented, but can that talent come through under pressure? Now, also it's key for the Pakistani audience listening to this, and also the West Indian, anyone who's listening to this, really. But for those who are listening to this, who are going to be tuning into that series, one thing that people have to also understand is Rodman Powell and Romario Shepherd didn't make it across to the Netherlands. They flew to London and then there was visa issues, so they never actually made it across to the Netherlands for the series. So they have flown straight into Pakistan to meet the rest of the team. What's going to be crucial for me is how do we incorporate Rodman Powell and Romario Shepherd? As you've correctly pointed out, King scored runs, Brooks scored runs, Hope scored runs, Mayers scored runs. Rodman has to be in the team, but it's a question now of where does he come in the team? What's his position? The one thing we didn't have versus the Netherlands is we didn't, Carl Mayer's possibly the only one, but we didn't really have somebody going at 130. Because when someone's going at 130 strike rate, they're taking the game away from the opposition. We have 3 players who I would call power hitters. Puran, but he's in really bad form at the moment. Rodman Powell, and even Romario Shepherd as a lower order batter can do it as well. So against the Netherlands, we lacked that. So it'll be very interesting to me to see how do we get Rodman and Romario back into the side? And if they do come straight into the side versus Pakistan, how do we balance it up? We were able to get away with their absence against the Netherlands because we had enough quality, as you've mentioned. Akil Hussain, top quality spinner, both in the power play, out the power play, so on any stage of the innings. Hayden Walsh was bowling with confidence again. His googly was coming out good, etc. But Romario Shepherd improves our bowling attack. Carl Mayers was having to bowl 10 overs versus the Netherlands. He would not normally do that because we were down bowlers. So it'll be very interesting. But I think, like I say, to just kind of return to the key point, I want to see if these players can seize the moments under pressure. Their talent isn't in any doubt whatsoever. We know how good they can be, but they've got to be able to do it when they're under the pump. So that will be key in this series.
That is some fantastic insight coming from Machel St. Patrick Hewitt of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Again, so excited to have you over here with us. And moving on, you mentioned the absences of Evan Lewis, Shimron Hetmeyer, and even Jason Holder will very much hurt West Indies' chances in this series because, of course, there's such great players. Holder, of course, has a lot of cricket coming up, so that resting him makes sense. And then Hetmeyer, of course, had a baby, so I understand why he would not want to take part of these 2 tours to Netherlands and Pakistan. But then you've got Evan Lewis, and I want you to shed some light on this, Mash. The fitness test controversy that's surrounding West Indies cricket. You saw it with Hetmeyer earlier. We're seeing it with Evan Lewis right now. Now, Evan Lewis is a top drawer limited overs cricketer. You absolutely need to have him in the lineup. And he was playing in the IPL for Lucknow. And I believe he did pass a test over there or might have taken a test over there for West Indies cricket and failed it. Now, this, from an outsider's perspective, there's something dodgy going on over here. I want you to shed some light on what exactly this fitness controversy entails to and how can West Indies move beyond this and get their best players in their international team?
I'm going to try and give a simple answer to this because I'm so exasperated with the idea that international cricketers can't pass a fitness test. Their fitness test that they have to pass, in England, we call it the bleep test. In West Indies, they call it the yo-yo test. But basically, you run 20 yards, you hear a bleep, you run back again. They're supposed to score a minimum of 17 on it. For those of you who are familiar with the test, go look it up. But they're supposed to score a minimum of 17. We've got players, you've mentioned 2 of them, in Hetmeyer and Lewis, who have repeatedly failed this test. It makes no sense. You can't be an international and you're failing this test. So I'm going to give you now my conspiracy theory. This does not mean it's true, and I don't want anyone listening to this to say Machel of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast said this is what's happening. But I'm now going to start saying this on public platforms until somebody tells me to either shut up or tell me that I'm wrong. I am now convinced that some players are failing it on purpose. I'm now convinced they are because fitness is the only thing you can take control of when it comes to international sport. You can be out of form. You can have flaws in your technique. You can be going through a bad stretch like Puran is right now. You can have to go through some remedial work for your action, things like that. But fitness, everybody's on a level playing field with fitness. The same way how Shaheen Shah Afridi has to pass some fitness tests for Pakistan, no doubt, is the same way how Evan Lewis should have to pass a fitness test for West Indies. And the idea that some people have in the Caribbean that this fitness test must be stopped because too many players are failing it and West Indies are hurting themselves by not picking them. I don't subscribe to that viewpoint because the fitness test shouldn't be that hard to pass. I reckon I could pass it. So, and the thing is, I'm not an international athlete, but what I mean is, when I say I reckon I could pass it, because I'd be taking it seriously. You cannot tell me that someone who is paid as a professional, and actually, this is the other point. Some of these players we're talking about have contracts with the cricket board. So imagine, let's forget cricket for a second. Imagine you and I run a business and you have people under contract and they're supposed to do something basic as part of their contract and they repeatedly don't do it. Surely they shouldn't even get a contract. Why have they even got a contract? And disclaimer, I want Evan Lewis in the side. I want Shimron Hetmeyer in the side. I think both of them are fantastic players and I rate both of them. But if you aren't doing something that you're contracted to be doing, aren't you taking the mick? So, like I say, my conspiracy theory at the moment is, are people failing this stuff on purpose? Because it doesn't make sense to me otherwise. As you said, and just to clarify, I'll speak for Evan purely because that's the one I know more about. And obviously, Shimron's had a child, his wife's had a child, so his is nothing to do with fitness at the moment. Although, anyways, I'll leave that out. But Evan was carrying an injury prior to going to the IPL, so he couldn't do the fitness test with the rest of his franchise, which would be Trinidad and Tobago Red Force. As I understand it, Cricket West Indies organised with his franchise to do the test, and he failed. What I don't know is, did he fail because he was still injured? Did he fail because he happened to be sick that day? I don't know. All I know is I have been told, because I went to the press conference and asked the question directly to go and get some specific answers. And I was told he failed. Lucknow told Cricket West Indies that he had failed. Now, for all I know, maybe Lucknow deliberately, I don't know, maybe they lied. I don't know. But all I do know is that I was told in an official capacity that Evan Lewis failed the test. How is Evan Lewis failing a test? How? And how is he doing this again? This is his second time. So I don't know if you've had any kind of similar issues with any kind of Pakistani cricketers where they've failed before and there's been like a big debate about what's going on and so on and so forth. But it's a massive, massive issue amongst West Indian fans as to, is it the players to blame? Is it Cricket West Indies to blame? Are the players not being professional? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate. Back in the day in the Mickey Arthur era in Pakistan cricket, Umar Akmal failed a bunch of fitness tests, but that was quite evident as well, looking at his shape. So, I mean, all Pakistan fans were quite content, I feel, or at least more so, that Umar Akmal is out of the side due to fitness issues. But yeah, you look at Evan Lewis and you don't think like this is a guy who would have fitness issues. And again, Hetmeyer, maybe he might be a bit on the plump side, but again, he's got so much talent. And like you said, this is a very basic requirement. So it should be fulfilled by contracted players. And even us fans from the opposition teams like Pakistan, and I'm sure across the globe, we want to see our teams compete with the strongest possible West Indian 11. So it is a bit disappointing, of course. My next question, Machel, is around Shai Hope. Now, this is a guy, like I mentioned before, averages north of 15 ODI cricket, has been West Indies cricket's mainstay in ODI cricket at the top order for quite a while now. But I feel like his strike rate, which is around 75, that might not be to the standards of modern day cricket. Do you think that this is something he could work on in Pakistan?
It's going to be hard for him to work on it in Pakistan. If anything, I expect his strike rate versus Pakistan to be in the low 70s because I think his role versus Pakistan, well, his role will be the same that it always is. Get in, bat deep, and let everybody else kind of be explosive around you as and when. That will be his role. Now, I will freely admit, if you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, possibly even 2.5 years ago, if I was happy with Shai Hope's strike rate, I would have said no. And I was saying no at the time. I wasn't saying drop him, but I was saying that I wasn't as ecstatic as others seem to be with him scoring so many centuries at such a low strike rate. I felt that in the modern context of ODI cricket, celebrating someone scoring lots of ODI centuries but a strike rate of 70 was ridiculous. I'd say that in the last year and a half, Shai has worked on his ODI game, and I've seen far more innings from him where he's clearly been a bit more aggressive from the get-go. Still not over 100, no way, but let's say in the higher 80s. That's still, by the way, probably not good enough. But you spoke about, at the top, I think with Pakistan, you spoke about Imam,
Yes.
and saying that I think that's probably the person to link to them, because you were
Very
talking about how
good
people,
parallel over there,
yeah,
because Imam ul Haq supporters would slander him, or well, Pakistan fans would slander him for his strike rate. Whereas I always thought, when you've got Fakhar with you,
mm,
maybe his strike rate isn't that big of an issue.
right. So in recent years, Shai has clearly worked on his strike rate. Versus the Netherlands, I think he had a strike rate across the 3 games of 82. That's still not good. But if others are batting around you far more aggressively, I think it plays its role. My issue was only when he was doing it and the strike rate was in the low 70s. That's not good enough. But I think if you're doing 80 to 85 or maybe 80 to 90 and everybody else around you is able to go 100 plus, I think it's fine, because then you are clearly playing your anchor role. If he does it and he goes for the innings like he's often done, 11 ODI centuries, he can be explosive at the back end. We've seen his 6 hitting range in CPL, so he knows how to do it. But we have to be honest, the weakness of the West Indies ODI side is we don't often bat 50 overs. So you can understand why his kind of default is, let me dig in. If it means I'm batting at 82, so be it. But at least someone's here for everybody else to bat around. So I do get it, because we're not that strong an ODI side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can understand how, Shai Hope needs to be that anchor in a West Indian team where everyone else can be explosive around him. And Pakistan for sure will be looking to get his wicket in particular very early if they are to make early inroads in this ODI series. So my next question, Mash, is around Multan. Of course, there's sweltering heat in Multan at the moment, and you're going to have batting friendly tracks. Now, do these conditions in particular suit one team or another? Pakistan and West Indies, of course, are both very used to hot climate, but 45 degrees Celsius is something else.
Yeah, so I've had a few Pakistani friends inform me in the last 24 hours. I don't think I'd realized until they'd informed me that it's going to be ridiculously hot. And to the point where actually, I don't know what level you have to reach to be a danger for players. I'm not saying, oh, we must protect the players at all costs, although we should, but that's exceptionally hot for any kind of sporting activity to be going on, particularly if you're right and it's batting friendly and you're just running around in the field the whole day. It's going to test the West Indies a lot. It's probably going to test Pakistan a lot as well. It's going to test the West Indies a lot. I think it's going to test the West Indies even more so because we flew out of the Netherlands today. So what we're either in Pakistan later tonight as we're recording this, or they're there to early on a Monday morning, right? That gives them 2 days to acclimatize to that heat and then play in the first ODI on Wednesday. So I think it's doubly difficult. There's acclimatizing in a 48-hour window, then having to play a match in 40 plus degrees heat. So it's not going to be easy. And that doesn't mean it's easy for the Pakistan players, but it's possibly easier because of being in home conditions and not having to struggle with the Europe to Asia flight followed by an acclimatization period. How many training sessions are they going to have? One? And then,
Yeah.
but that's not Pakistan's fault. What I'm talking about there is actually speaks to a wider issue about the cricket calendar and how it's ridiculous if you think about it that players are going from the Netherlands to Pakistan for a series where points matter with only 48 hours to properly. That's ridiculous. That's actually ridiculous.
Yeah, I absolutely agree over there. And I guess that too is because of all this T20 cricket going around, franchise
Mm.
cricket. I think that is why the cricket calendar is so jam packed and teams don't have ample time to prepare for important series, like it is the case with the West Indies in this particular series. Now, Mash, I'll come back to predictions later on. I want to step away from this ODI series for a bit and I want to talk about West Indies and Pakistan as cricketing nations. Of course, they share a very strong cricketing heritage. And I'd say that they are still two of the most important cricketing nations across the globe, outside the big three, of course. And both cricketing boards have their own franchise T20 structures. Pakistan has the PSL and the West Indies has the CPL. Of course, the CPL has been a very popular destination for Pakistani talent to go and play T20 cricket. And we've seen lots of West Indian cricketers come to the PSL and show us their talents as well. And if you look at this cross cultural exchange of cricketing talent and, systems, I think there's a lot to gain over here. Of course, I can give you an example of Imad Wasim doing really well for the Jamaica Talawas and then becoming the number one T20 international bowler in the world, doing really well for Pakistan. And for West Indies, I can think of maybe a Brandon King, who did exceptionally well for Islamabad United. And now you can see him as a regular in West Indies white ball cricket. So, how important do you think these leagues are for both nations to kind of nurture each other's talents and groom top level cricketers?
Yeah, I think you make some valid points there. In fairness, I'm very much aware that West Indian players do like going to the PSL. You kind of get a view sometimes in world cricket where everyone's like it's IPL or nothing, and actually, people forget there's other leagues out there, and West Indian players do enjoy going to the PSL. I think PSL is in a bit of an unfortunate position though, because of where it is in the calendar. I think sometimes it's hard for PSL to get our top talent now, just because of when PSL happens, and we tend not because West Indians don't want to go. They want to go, but we tend to be playing internationals now when PSL is going on. So even if a PSL side gets a West Indian, you might only get them for, 4 games, 5 games,
Right.
or something like that. Or they go and then they come back, or they're drafted and then actually they get called up to West Indies, so they can't actually go. So a replacement player has to come in and so on and so forth. But every single West Indian player that I've spoken to who's played PSL raves about how good it is and how much it has raised their game by playing PSL. And I think you make a perfect example by referencing Brandon King as such an example. I believe that Brandon benefited massively from going to PSL because Brandon's been going for a rough time since his breakout CPL season in 2019 in terms of T20 cricket. And it's only in the last, 6 months that he's come back into the West Indies T20 fold and looked like the player he was in 2019. So yes, PSL most definitely helps West Indian cricketers and helps the development of their game. And do you know what? The other thing I think people have to understand, possibly more for us going to PSL than Pakistani players come into CPL, although I'll get to that in a minute. When our players go to things like PSL, the level of professionalism is what they like. And when I say professionalism, I mean the better facilities, the better training facilities. I don't know if it's the better coaching, but just the access to knowledge, the access to sharing a changing room with different players and understanding the game a bit more and developing their game. Dean Smith was somebody when he got drafted, although I don't know how many games he got to play in the end, he talked about, like it's an amazing experience to be able to go and actually delve and pick brains and so on and so forth. The other way round now, for when Pakistani players come to CPL, you're right. The Pakistani players love coming to CPL. The best examples are Shoaib Malik and Mohammed Hafiz, who basically they might be half Guyanese now. To be honest, so there is a clear love. There is a clear love from Pakistani players to come and experience the CPL. I think CPL is a brand that definitely embraces the best of Pakistani talent. Because actually, and it's interesting you raise Imad Wasim, because once upon a time, I would have said to you that Imad Wasim wasn't that good. And I don't know how that was. I don't know how he was received in Pakistan, but I used to think he wasn't that good. It's all I'm gonna say. But his game over the last, I don't know how many years we want to say, has improved immeasurably. So yeah, I don't know if he would say that CPL is one of those things that has helped. But I used to just think he was an ordinary player once upon a time. But yeah, for the Talawas, he's like the go-to. He's been like the go-to player when he's been playing for the Talawas.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was a 2016 season in which the Talawas won, and I think he was the player of the final. And he was in a team which had Kumar Sangakkara,
Mm,
Dale Steyn. I think Chris Gale was also playing on that team. So he learned a lot and he spoke really highly of the CPL and his experiences over there, as do most Pakistani players. Like you mentioned, Shoaib Malik. I know so many West Indian players actually credit him
mm,
for improving their game. And
yeah.
again, Mohammad Hafiz as well. Like you said, they're half Guyanese by now. But yeah, I definitely like to see this cross cultural exchange when it comes to cricket, and it's really heartwarming. And of course, no Pakistani fan will ever forget the contributions of West Indies cricket towards bringing international cricket back in Pakistan. You can think of Darren Sammy, who has now been awarded a national prize, the
Mm,
Sitara-e-Pakistan, and also Viv Richards. The kind of respect that he commands in Pakistan, just having him as a part of the PSL has really done wonders for the brand. And again, the CPL, biggest party in sports. So I hope that both these brands prosper in the future. Now, quickly, Mash, just some predictions before we end this episode. What do you think will be the scoreline at the end of this Pakistan versus West Indies ODI series?
I want everyone to know that I say this because I've just been watching the West Indies in the Netherlands. I think Pakistan will win all 3 games. That's what my head says. My heart says Pakistan are going to win all 3 games. But realistically, I think most West Indian fans, if we lost all 3, most West Indian fans would accept that if they were all tight games. If they're all tight and we end up losing, I actually think most people will accept that and say, you know what? That's not bad. We were in Pakistani conditions. We didn't have much time to acclimatize, but we played some good cricket. And if we'd won certain moments, we might. I think most of us would accept that. If we get thrashed in all 3 games, no one's going to accept that, even though I think that's more likely than running Pakistan hard. The other flip side is let me just for argument's sake, let me say, could West Indies win 1 game? Yes, we could. Notice I'm not saying 2 or 3. We could win 1 game, but here's the only reason why. Pakistan would have to contribute to beating themselves. That's the other. And I don't say that to criticize the West Indies team. I just think that's facts. I think we would have to play 100%. And Pakistan would have to drop their levels ever so slightly. Like Babar would have to have an off day. Shaheen would have to have an off day. They'd have to drop some catches. By the way, which is possible. They'd have to drop some catches.
Very much so.
Drop some catches and then we win. That's the scenario in which I could see us winning a few games. But I don't see us. If Pakistan play at 100% and we play at 100%, 99 times out of 100, Pakistan will win, is what I'm basically saying.
That's a harsh prediction. I'm going to be a little bit more lenient with my prediction for the series. I'm going to go 2-1 Pakistan, and I think in 1 game, West Indies will absolutely blow Pakistan away. I'm looking at Nicholas Pooran, kind of scoring 150 not out or something. But yeah, I just feel like it'll be a bit more competitive because the conditions are difficult. Both sides will be tested, and they're both very, very dynamic units. You can expect almost anything from both of these teams. So I'm going to go 2-1. But anyway, once again, thank you so much for your time, Machel. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show.
No worries. And like I said at the top of the show, thank you for having me on. For those people who are listening, because I know there'll be people who will be watching this who've come over from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, because obviously we will have put this out on the channels. Make sure you follow Grassroots Cricket after this. Give them a follow. They'll be doing a lot of content during the course of this Pakistan West Indies series. So go and give them a follow. You know what we will say. Support anybody, whoever show we go on, support what they're doing. So press that follow button, press that subscribe button, press that like button, and interact in the comments and all of that. But thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You heard the man, guys. So go like, share, and subscribe. And do check out the Caribbean Cricket Podcast as well. It's top quality content. And you can just click their name in the title of this video. Go subscribe to their channel. They do some amazing work. That's a wrap for this episode of Cricket Mehfil. And we'll be back with you soon enough, probably after this ODI series. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Shot, not catch over